We've been saying for some time that the risk to the economy is more on the side of deflation than inflation. So as COVID created all the destruction that it did and supply chains really being thrown off, we've been through a period here of inflation, which I think investors are baking into the cake. That's the underlying assumption out there, that we're in an inflationary period and that it was turbocharged by the supply chain disruptions that occurred during the coronavirus. And of course, they will be focused on monetary policy when they say that. I am a student of economic history, and I've lived quite a bit of it myself. So seen a lot of markets and started in the business during the 70s. I was in college when inflation was raging. So I know what that is. And I truly believe we are not going back there, and that anyone planning for it is probably going to be making some mistakes. Today we have five platforms. DNA sequencing, robotics, energy storage, artificial intelligence, and blockchain technology, all of which are deflationary, and not just by a little bit either. Jeff Gundlach and Howard Marks, and I think Stan Druckenmiller and Ray Dalio, all of them, I think, have been very, very concerned about a deflationary bust. And we agree with them in this respect. We think it's going to be balanced by a deflationary boom. So that's where we differ. But where we agree is that there are companies who thought the world would never change and have been, again, catering to short-term shareholders who wanted that extra penny or two in earnings, and so got it by having the companies leverage up and take more debt and shrink the number of shares. And they've also been focused on dividends. They are probably saddled with products and services that will become obsolete because of the record-breaking amount of innovation taking place today. And in order to service their debt, they are going to have to cut prices and move those goods and services that are on their way out anyway. So I am concerned about that. And I think there's going to be a lot of confusion around it as well. So that's why we keep our eye on the innovation ball, because that is going to balance these issues out to a great extent. But what it will also mean is that the traditional GDP numbers we're going to be seeing are going to be very low. And so, and growth will seem very scarce. I think it will proliferate over time, and that some of the companies that we own, the stocks we own, they're not in any index out there. So a lot of public market investors aren't exposed to them, but we think there are going to be a lot more of those opportunities going forward. There will be a lot of job displacement. There will be, no question about it. In fact, when we started our company in 2014, Oxford University had just put out a piece which said, and it was about the United States, that said 47% of all jobs in the United States would be lost to automation and artificial intelligence by 2035. And they left it there. Hair on fire, headlines screaming, a lot of fear about automation. We got the question every meeting. And what they had neglected to do, which we did, was finish the story. So with automation and artificial intelligence, productivity is going to go up dramatically. We think more than it ever has, certainly in modern times. And with productivity increases comes more wealth creation and more GDP creation. And according to our estimates, in the year 2035, because of automation and artificial intelligence, we believe that GDP here in the United States will not be 28 trillion, which would be, if you drew the growth, linear growth, that's where it would be, but instead will be $40 trillion. And it is our job, focused only on innovation, to figure out where that extra $12 trillion is going to come from, and then to educate and orient our investors, of course, but also parents and grandparents. How should you educate your children? How should you steer them so that they are on the right side of change? Because there are going to be so many exciting opportunities.
I think the thing that worries me the most is inequality both within and across countries. And it's something that the financial markets puts aside as a social problem, not really an economic or financial problem. And we risk seeing the issue of inequality gather momentum. COVID has already been the great unequalizer, but rather than go back to where we've come from, we are now creating the dynamics for inequality to worsen and to assume greater importance in disrupting all sorts of things in our society.
Well, let's dive in a little to maybe some of the places that you see it most striking, that may worry you the most.
So, of course, we see it in income and wealth, and that has massive economic consequences. A highly unequal society is not an economic healthy society. But the one thing that worries me even more than that, and I'm already worried about income and wealth inequality, is the inequality of opportunity. We know what COVID did to people who had no Wi-Fi at home, who had no computers. We know that school districts, public school districts, lost touch with a lot of their students. And these students risk not only becoming unemployed, but unemployable, which means a lost generation of young people. We're also seeing the aftermath of COVID as we slowly emerge from it, create different dynamics around the world. If you're sitting in a developing country today, you can no longer assume that companies will come to you. The onus is increasingly on us coming to our employer. And that is the real issue when education is lagging, when technology is lagging. So I do worry that we're going to see this massive process get larger if we're not careful.
Do you have any prescriptions? Do you have any answers to how we could fix the problem?
Yeah, I think we're seeing it today. I think it's ultimately investing in human and physical infrastructure. It's about enabling people to do more and to do better. It's about providing people with transformational opportunities. It starts at a very early age, at pre-K, exposing bright minds to exciting education and opportunities. It continues throughout the middle school, high school, university, making elite universities more accessible to people who deserve to be there, but shouldn't be held back because they come from the wrong zip code or because their parents have never been to an education. There's a lot that can be done. It's about fundamentally asking the question, how do we enable our resources, human and physical, to be more inclusive and more productive?
The number one risk that we're really vulnerable to is the sustainability of the global payment system. And I choose the word sustainability over the word vulnerability because the real key here is keeping the global payment system running. And we've had so many hacks, terrorist attacks, the Colonial Pipeline incident. It would appear to me that we are extremely vulnerable to having an attack against the payment system of the financial markets, and not just here in the United States, but in Europe. And so, what I'm really talking about is things like the Fed wire, where all the bank's money, clears through. But then also something like the Depository Trust Corporation, the DCC, SWIFT, Euroclear. I mean, I can just keep going on and on and on. And if there was a synchronized attack, we would essentially bring the global financial markets to its knees. And probably the first response would be that securities prices would crash. And the second issue would be that we would probably have to close all the exchanges and in the world potentially in order to figure out how we restore the global payment system. The thing that bothers me about something like the global payment system is I don't think anyone's focused on it. And this really takes a high degree of international cooperation. It takes a real macro look, meaning there needs to be somebody or some group of people who are looking at how everything interconnects and where the potential vulnerabilities are. I think at this stage, this is in the world of the unthinkable. And so therefore, I've used this phrase before, there's a cognitive dissonance around it, which is to talk about this idea, the consequences are so dire that immediately people just sort of move on to say, well, that'll never happen, right? And so it's, I think there's a real vulnerability to the markets in general, but even to the existence of capitalism if the payment system were to be suddenly disrupted.
Now, what likelihood do you see of some sort of damaging attack on the global payment system and the US payment system in particular?
Right. Well, I think that I would put the probability at very high. I mean, certainly well over 50%. And the reason that I put it so high is, one is nobody seems focused on it. And two, for someone who's sitting out there thinking that they want to disrupt our economy, this is the most logical choke point in the economy. So, I got accused when talking about this once that I'm actually alerting terrorists and other governments on how to attack us. But I think that the likelihood is they're already thinking about it. Delivery versus payment, which is the standard way that we've delivered securities for 100 years, is sort of in an age like ours kind of ridiculous. There's no reason why that just can't be instantaneous. And so, but that's going to take, a new generation of technology, and whether that's blockchain or whatever that is, it needs to be modernized. And in the short run, I think that people, especially people like central banks, exchanges, so on and so forth, need to really take a hard look at their systems, not just their system, but the interconnectivity of the system and how secure is that connection that's being made. Not just from the standpoint of it being disrupted, but since you're sending information through the ether, what's the chance that can be redirected somewhere?
Are you saying that we don't have a financial system that's built for our modern era?
Exactly. We're living off of an antiquated system that was a hodgepodge of things that got put together.
Do you think that tech companies have a role to play in making this financial system safer?
Absolutely. I mean, look, without the intelligence, the sophistication of the tech industry, I think it would be virtually impossible. But, that's the history of the United States, right? I mean, the aircraft companies that developed, sophisticated new planes and bombers in the Second World War, it was all done by the private sector. So, historically, the private sector is always called upon to take a leadership role. It just